What if there was a way you can double your catch rate on your steelhead this winter season? Check this out. I got a rig set up you're going to love. Now, steelhead, they love jigs, and steelhead love beads. So why can't we find a way to use the two together and maximize the benefits of both in the same setup? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, and it's a dropper setup. This is not necessarily new, but the way we're going to do this is show you guys how to make any kind of steelhead jig into a dropper jig. Very simple, very easy, and deadly effective. This is one of my most favorite techniques to use for winter steelhead, especially in the hatchery time frame. December, like we are, we're approaching the peak of the hatchery run here by Christmas time into the new year. So having yourself set up for best success is going to help you catch more fish and maximize the time that we have coming up. Just having historic floods and coming into some other water this next week, this is all setting up a scenario to have some incredible fishing once the rivers finally settle into shape. What that means, most of our fish are going to be in the systems. You're going to have a shot at more fish, but how are you going to capitalize fishing two different areas of the water column where this is legal? And I'll put the disclaimer right here. Make sure there is no restrictions. Otherwise, you're good to go. But check your regulations to make sure first. What this setup allows for is to fish two different aspects of the water column. The aspect of your jig itself and the weight that this allows the jig to get down. Then you're also going to be fishing this bead underneath your jig in a way and fashion that presents this naturally to the fish. You're going to double your chances at catching more fish in general. This rig gave me so much confidence. I will tell you, from the last few years that I've been able to find the steelhead around here, it has brought me the success and luck the times that I've gone out. I used to individually fish jigs and had a lot of success just running jigs by themselves. Or other days, they wanted beads, and so I ran those by themselves and caught fish. But then I started messing with the two together. When I started doing that, I grew a ton of confidence in the presentation, but I also noticed how much different I was getting bites over individually fishing these separate. So that's what we're going to dive right into. We're going to go over here to the bait mat, and I'm going to show you exactly how this rig is set up, and then we'll cover the gear that I like to float fish this on. We're float fishing dropper jigs with beads for steelhead. Check it out. Now we got ourselves set up on the fillet away bait mat table to show you guys this on the close-up side, to really break this down and how simple this setup is, but also how this can be used with any jig that you may run. Again, double check regulations. This is one of the nightmare patterns that we tied this last week, as well as this one here, right? Two pretty standard steelhead patterns that will catch fish all over the place. We got other patterns like the classic hackle nightmare, very, very effective, gives a little bit of a sparse presentation. And then you have your bead styles, okay? Everything under the sun, to worms even as well. Yes, you can do this setup with worms. So we're going to show you, first of all, how I like to rig my beads themselves. I like running hard beads with this method. And the reason is because that hard bead does not interfere at all with buoyancy. Some manufacturers of soft beads have a little bit more of neutral to floating, so this setup does not necessarily ride in the water column exactly how it's intended to. It'll still catch fish, there's no doubt, but you start getting too much blowback on the jig from the bead, and it doesn't fish effectively. What I have found with these hard beads is they are going to fish a lot closer to the bottom and give you the presentation that you're looking for. This is a custom painted one that I have really fallen in love with that I do. It's that nail polish pink and a chartreuse big hot spot. We've even done a couple of them where you make it look like an eyed yolk pattern. Really, really works good. But there's other stuff dependent on the water conditions. beads are super effective because they are matching what the steelhead are eating. But that jig profile has so many other things that it matches up to what they like to eat or have eaten in their lifetime. Then there's everything under the sun with pink worms. Worms alone imitate kind of that shock and awe factor, right? Something big, something to get in their attention and aggressiveness. This ends up being sometimes a cleanup or even potentially that first set through the run. But what if there was a way to make this even more effective too by running a dropper bead off of it? And we're going to show you exactly how this is done. So I'm running 12-pound test fluorocarbon here. You can run 10 too, just all depends on the size of the fish. I have a number 4. So this is a number 4 VMC Sure Set bait hook on this one. You can even bump that up to a number 2 dependent on your bead size. That is a size 10 mil, but if I was going to run the 12 mil, I'm going to bump that up to a number 2 size hook. You can see the difference. I like running one of these rubber bobber stops because it really just acts natural for that hard bead to stop, but it can also free float on the line a little bit. Then for leader, okay, this is about 18 inches right there. Might be a little bit on the longer side to start with, but I usually set it up and see what the conditions are before I end up fishing. So I'm going to look at water clarity. I'm going to identify the depth of the run as best as we can, and that's going to help us dictate what is that leader distance going to be for the bead. I typically don't go any longer than 18 inches though. So anywhere between that foot to 18 inches is the preference. But let's take a look then how this rig is set up. So you can do this with any of these style jigs, which is perfect, okay? You're going to end up taking, especially if you got one of these classic Bomac beaded style jigs, you're going to tie your knot right behind that head. What this does is it secures it and locks it in, but it's also giving this a straight direction immediately down to the setup here, right? Again, just your standard bead setup. I just had this one from a previous video we did last year, still rigged up. It caught a couple fish, really good, but it's nothing crazy. This presentation uses the weight of the jig to get the bead down, and then the spacing of this about 12 to 15 inches allows for this to naturally fish that bottom part of the water column. Ideally, you're fishing within that foot to foot and a half off the bottom so the steelhead can see. Well, now you're able to cover literally a rolling egg on the bottom and that jig a foot or so off of that. Therefore, effectively fishing 2 areas of the water column at once. And here's the best part. This thing does not tangle very often at all. You can also tie stuff, and I've seen people do it, where they'll put the dropper bead tied off the back of the hook. It will work, don't get me wrong. But after fishing for so many years doing it this way, I have found you don't get as much of the tangles. It allows for this to pendulum down appropriately, and it fishes directly under the weight that your jig is using. You don't need split shot. If you're fishing too fast to water, I suppose you could put one in the middle here, but here's a couple things you have to be careful of. You end up putting a weight too close to the presentation can throw off the natural movement. Regulations in some cases don't allow for a weight to be within 12 inches of a hook. So you also have to be careful of that with your bead setups. So using your jig to separate that out and not having split shot potentially impacting the integrity of your line as well really helps this rig set up and fish. So let me show you then how this is done with a new rig. We got this one that I just showed you. It's all ready and tied up. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take this Nightmare, okay? We're going to tie my favorite knot. I literally use this thing for everything. So I'm creating myself a big loop by taking it up and over the head of the jig. I'm going to then here make a loop behind, a secondary loop behind, and then a third loop behind. And I'm going to take this tag in and go right back through the center of those loops. just like so. I'm going to put some saliva on that to make sure that goes down smoothly. Okay. That cinches right behind the head there. Honestly, I have never had an issue with one of these breaking. I've never had a problem. Now, it can happen if the knot isn't correct. If you burn it. But that's it. Now I'm effectively fishing that whole thing. But what if we want to do that with a worm? How do we do that? So, let's take this worm setup. Got our worm. We're going to do the exact same thing here. So I'm going to go... Ooh. Okay, we got our worm. Going to do the exact same thing. Loop it up and over. One loop. Two loop. Three loops. Back through it in the backside. Okay. Saliva. Boom. You are now nice and secured right behind the jig. Cut your tag end off. Now with a worm, you're not impeding this at all, and you're able to now fish two different areas of the water column. I honestly think this is a game-changing setup in the way that this is presented and set up to rig that you're not going to end up having to have specialized jig heads all the time. There are some brands out there that make some really nice dropper jig heads, and they work. But here's the thing. We don't always have those with us. So you can now effectively make any of your setups a dropper setup, now covering two different areas to fish. Ain't that cool? Rigging wise, you've seen this a few times. Standard float fishing setup for Steelhead. I got some videos that go over exactly how to set everything all up to rig it all. But I run a slip float system, inline float weight, about 3 feet a leader to start with in most cases, and then the jig of choice. That's what I'm using most of the time. But because this setup, I typically actually go 2.5 feet of leader because that jig has that extra foot in there. So I can then play with having a longer top shot section that the float is going to slide upon, that I can adjust my depth with the float and not having to change my leader at all. A lot of our river systems that we're fishing for these hatchery fish are going to end up being 7 to 8 feet deep in most of the runs max. So you don't need giant full-on 10-foot leaders or anything crazy. You can usually adjust to find the depth of the fish just based upon having a good top shot setup and a slip float. Smaller systems, you can definitely use those fixed float setups to get more sensitivity out of the whole setup altogether. But I really love how these fish with this setup where you can pin a bobber stop on the bottom of your slip float, and you essentially are making a slip float a fixed float, and from there it really can do everything you need. This is a standard, just 8.5 foot small. It's kind of my do everything rod you guys have seen me use a lot, the Salmon Extreme series spinning from Velocity Tackle. It's an 8'6", 12 to 20 small stream float rod is what I use this for. When I'm on bigger water, I have a 10.5 foot rod that I love for float fishing. But this just gives me a little bit more feel on the smaller bodies of water to keep everything close and in control, because typically I don't have a lot of back cast room. So one thing I will point out, again, standard stuff here for the gear, 3,000 size reel, 35 to 40 pound braided line is typically all you need. But when you cast this, you're not going to be able to, because the bead is set up on the bottom of that jig, to really whip your presentation out there. This is going to be kind of a side lob cast, and you have to watch your presentation. As this gets closer to the water, you're going to put your finger over to kind of slow the speed down. In an ideal perfect world, it's going to pendulum across and down, and therefore everything separates itself out on the gear and allows you to be fishing correctly right from the start. If this fouls up at all because it went crazy in the air, you're going to have to reel in and fix everything and make sure that's all correct. Now this is the reward of the bead dropper. Check out that beautiful fish Ryan just got. Tell me, is that a steelhead? Or is that just a huge resonant rainbow? That thing is fat. What a cool fish. Good job, buddy.
Thank you.
I want to hear from you guys. Are you fishing dropper jigs like this? Is there a different way that you prefer how to do them? I want to hear it from you guys below. I always love responding and seeing you guys' comments. So hope you guys like this. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and we're going to go fish some flooded rivers for the first winter steelhead of 2025. You're going to want to stay tuned. Tight lines and fish on!